In this CineGuru tutorial, we're going to take a look at image triggers, which are a way to display images or sprites on the screen during your cinematics. So here's a pretty simple setup that we've got here. It's a static camera that has a little zoom in towards this soldier that's going to be kind of sat on the edge of his little camp bed, and our cine trigger zone is all set to trigger that off when we enter that zone. But we've also got this secondary zone here. And actually, even though it's a zone, the location of it doesn't actually matter. This is an image trigger. So if I just sort of drag one out there and just open it up from scratch, you can see there's really nothing in there apart from the name image trigger. But by naming it in different ways, you can get it to do different things with the sprites that you assign in the image file field down here. The reason it's a zone is because we based it off of the image in zone marker that comes with CineGuru. We wanted this field here, the image file parameter, we wanted that built into the editor, so you can literally go and specify what image you want to display. And we've actually included a couple of images with CineGuru. If you go into Script Bank Images, you'll find there's a CineGuru folder, and then you won't have all of these, but you'll have a few of them. Letterbox.png is the one we're going to demonstrate first. So Letterbox is probably the simplest way of using an image trigger zone. That literally just applies black bars to the top and bottom of your cinematics to give it a kind of a cropped sort of anamorphic widescreen look. And the way you set that up is pretty straightforward. You literally just name your image trigger letterbox, and then you specify where your letterbox image is. You don't have to use the one we included with CineGuru. You might want to use one that is perhaps even more cropped and the bars are even more extreme. But we included ones that crop a 16:9 frame down to 2:35:1, which is the standard aspect ratio for anamorphic widescreen if you're into your filmmaking. So if I just go into test game and show you what that looks like. So as we enter the zone, you can see that we'll have black bars on the top and bottom of our little shot. So let's trigger off that camera, and there you go. So immediately it looks a lot more cinematic. Now, one thing to note about the image trigger when it's using Letterbox is it will apply the Letterbox effect to every cinematic in your scene. So if we were to set up an entirely new cinematic elsewhere, you will still get the black bars top and bottom. And so for the rest of the examples in this tutorial, they will have the black bars top and bottom because this image trigger exists within our level. So the next way of using image triggers, let's just move our player start marker over here, is to use the camera function. So using this method, you have to actually set up your image trigger with a little bit more information. So let's just go into properties and let's just change a few things. So we've got a simple sequence set up here where we've got a 2-camera scene. So our first camera is just a static camera kind of zooming in on this car a little bit, and then we've also got a moving camera that moves between 2 nodes and then to an endpoint. So our first camera is called car cam 1, and our trigger zone is set to trigger that, our cine trigger zone. So if we go into our image trigger for a moment, we can actually name the image trigger the name of the camera that we want our image to appear. So I've got a little image down here. This is just a static image. It just says created in CineGuru. It's just a transparent PNG file. And so if I go through, I can add in different parameters to specify what we want to happen. So obviously we've got the name of our camera. We want our image to display when car cam 1 is active. The next thing we can add in is a delay. So I believe that shot is a 4-second shot. So if we typed in 2000, there will be a 2-second delay where the sprite is not displayed and then it comes in. You can then specify a node and a duration. Now in this case there is no node because it's a static camera, car cam. It just literally does a little zoom in. So we'll put 0 for that. But we can specify duration as well, and that's how long the sprite is held on screen for. And that can kind of go on to other shots in your sequence as well. So we'll set that to 4000, so it's on screen for 4 seconds. And you'll see that when we jump into test game, what's going to happen is we're going to go in and trigger that camera, And when car cam 1 is active, we'll have 2 seconds with just the letterboxing on screen. Then our sprite, the created in CineGuru, will pop up. And there it is. And you can see it's on screen for 4 seconds, which means it stays on screen during our next shot, which is quite useful. Incidentally, the way I set up this this camera move, if you wonder why it's quite smooth, is because hidden inside this car is a focal point. So yeah, that's a good tip to kind of get smoother camera motions, is to start using focal points. But we can also use the image trigger to not just trigger during static cameras like that. We can also trigger them during complex camera movements with nodes. So car cam 2 is the name of our camera with a node. And this time we get to specify which node we want our image to appear kind of near. So a little bit like with other examples in other bits of CineGuru, you have to specify the node that your camera is on its way to when you want the sprite to appear. So as you saw, we've got a camera with 2 nodes and an endpoint. So if I were to put in 2 as our node number, it means that, and let's reduce this down to 1000, it means that 1000 milliseconds, 1 second after passing through node 1, when it's on its way to node 2, it will display this image, created.png, for 4 seconds. So let's just apply changes and we'll hopefully see that in action. And it's taking a little bit longer to load these test games because it's loading various image files into memory. So we've got our zoom in, and then here's our camera move, and we've gone through node 1, and now, yeah, there we go, on the way to node 2, kind of at the midpoint of that shot, the sprite appeared. So that worked out pretty good. So that's how you can use the sort of camera mode of image triggers to display static images. But sometimes you might not want to display static images, you might want to display something that's a little bit more animated. And image triggers are actually capable of displaying image sequences. So an image sequence, I mean, like its name suggests, is a series of images numbered, and yeah, you basically play them back in order. So let me just show you what we're going to use here. This is a loop of 30 pictures, and it's an overlay of like a kind of a security camera looking thing. There is a bit of transparency built into this. You can see I've already taken into account the fact that we're going to have letterboxing on this, so I haven't made it sort of 1920 by 1080. I've kind of reduced the scale of it slightly, and so this is a pretty straightforward looping image sequence with a bit of noise. Hopefully YouTube compression isn't completely wiping that out. You can see there's a bit of noise on the images, and then a few frames where the little red dot in the top left corner goes away, and then it comes back as we cycle back round to the first image in the sequence. So let's get back to CineGuru. We've set up a static camera here that's going to be our security cam. It's called security, pretty simply. It's a 10-second shot, so quite a long shot really, but a static camera. And what we're going to do is set this image trigger up so that these 30 frames of security camera overlay loop, and it will do that automatically. So first off, we need to change the mode to sequence. So we type in sequence to begin with, and then comma, and then we type in the name of our camera. So we know our camera's called security, so we've typed in security. We don't want a delay on this, and this particular shot doesn't have any nodes, so we've just used 0, 0 for both of those parameters. But we know that the duration that we want is the length of that shot, which is 10 seconds. So we've put 10,000 milliseconds as our duration. And the last thing we need is the speed. So the speed is kind of like the number of milliseconds delay between frames. So every 20 milliseconds the frame will change, and it will tick up in the sequence. And if it gets to the end of the sequence and the shot is still carrying on, if that delay hasn't been reached, it will just loop back round and start again from scratch and go from 1 to 30. And it will do that until that delay time has has expired. So we obviously selected our cam overlay 1.png image. It's very important when you're numbering your image sequences to always start at the number 1. If you're exporting sort of your image sequences from video editing software, sometimes they'll put various zeros before that 1, especially if you're exporting sequences with hundreds or thousands of frames. Your first frame might be called something 001.png. Unfortunately, CineGuru can't recognize that that is a 1. So you will need to go through and name your files accordingly. So you can see in our security cam example, our frames are called cam_overlay 1, 2, 3, and they just tick up in order. So yeah, just something to be aware of when you're kind of naming your files. But now that we've done that, and we've specified obviously the first frame in our sequence, CineGuru knows to substitute in the next frame in the sequence every 20 milliseconds for the 10 seconds of this shot. So let's go into test game and see what that looks like in action. And again, because it's loading in 30 images, it does take a little bit longer to load. Okay, and there we go. So our security camera overlay is only 30 frames long, so it should only last kind of half a second, but it's being looped for 10 seconds, and it gives a quite a nice little effect. But obviously, if you're using it with letterboxing, you do have to be aware of that. If I were to take the letterboxing away, that security camera effect would only exist in the kind of middle portion of the screen. So that's how you can use the image sequence function. But you can also use it in more complex ways, and the final example I'm going to bring in is just over here. So, and I think actually I've kind of kept these out of the way for now, just to not clutter up our map. What I'm going to do is I've got a whole little camera sequence set up over here with cameras and nodes and a focal point. So I'm going to drag that all in, and actually there's a camera marker back here as well too. And I'm just going to have that kind of a little bit closer to the action, so it kind of goes through our scene a little bit. So this is a complicated camera move. It's got multiple nodes, and it's got a focal point in there as well. And basically this cine trigger zone in the corner here sets off a camera marker over here, which then flies through our scene through these various nodes and then begins to gain height. And there's actually a little focal point down here that it's pointing towards the whole time. It gives quite a nice effect. So obviously our cine trigger zone is fairly straightforward. It just sets off our camera, which is called flyby, and that'll work fine on its own. But what we want to do is add in a kind of a title card at some point during this sequence. So in this image trigger, we've set things up slightly differently. So again, we've used sequence as our mode, and our camera name is still flyby. But what we've said is that when the camera is on its way to node 2, 1 second after it leaves node 1, display an image sequence that starts title_1 for 6,250 milliseconds at an interval, if you will, of 50 milliseconds per frame. So that might seem like a very specific kind of number, but we just use basic maths to work that out. I know that my sequence is 125 frames long, so here it is. It's actually 124 frames long, but anyway, it's close enough. So yeah, so we know that it's 124 frames long, and I wanted a frame to be displayed every 50 milliseconds, so I just times 125 by 50, and I got 6,250. So that is that's where we got that number from. So let's take a look at that in action. By doing it this way, the duration is obviously less than the length of the shot. The shot goes on for quite a long time, and so because this duration is less than the length of our shot, it will only play the image sequence once. It won't loop it. If I wanted to loop it, I would just increase this number to be greater than the length of our shot. So hopefully that all made sense. I'm now going to jump into test game and show you what that looks like in action. So remember, we've set this up so that once the camera's gone through node 1, which I think is located somewhere near the camp bed, about a second after that we'll get a little title card come up, and it's a pretty straightforward title card. It's just some text that kind of zooms in a little bit, but it gives quite a nice effect. So here we go, and there it is. There's our title card. It doesn't look animated, but there is a subtle push in that kind of gets lost by the camera movement. But yeah, so the fade in and out is part of the image sequence. That's not controlled inside CineGuru. That's something that's baked into those into the transparency of those PNG files. And I think that's a pretty cool effect. So that is how you can use image triggers to do letterboxing and show static sprites, and also show image sequences in your cinematics. So have fun with that. It does take a little bit of practice to get used to, but I do encourage you to experiment and yeah, have fun.